Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take the sources you send our way and really try to pull out the core insights, those aha moments you're after, but, without making it feel like homework.
Exactly. No drowning allowed here.
Right. So this time, you send us a really fascinating chapter. It looks at the human brain in a pretty unique way, almost like it's a radio station, sending and receiving thoughts.
Yeah, it's quite the analogy. And it doesn't stop there. The chapter also gets into these intangible forces and just the incredible, almost unbelievable complexity of our own brains.
Okay, so let's start with that core idea, the brain as a radio. The author mentions this came up in talks with people like Alexander Graham Bell and Elmer Gates.
That's right. Pretty influential figures. They were exploring this idea that the brain isn't just, processing information, but actively vibrating with thought.
Vibrating and sending those vibrations out.
And receiving them, too, like a two-way radio operating on thought frequencies.
Okay, the chapter mentions the ether for these vibrations. Now, science has kind of moved on from the idea of a physical ether, hasn't it?
It has, definitely. But I think the useful bit here, the core insight, isn't about a literal substance called ether. It's more about the possibility of thoughts connecting in ways we don't fully understand, a sort of non-physical interconnectedness.
Ah, okay, so like how sometimes an idea just seems to be in the air.
Kind of, yeah. Or how inspiration might strike multiple people around the same time. The chapter uses the ether idea to explore that kind of phenomenon that our minds might be linked in subtle ways.
Interesting. And this receiving part connects to creative imagination. The chapter calls it the brain's receiving set.
Precisely. Sticking with the radio analogy, the creative imagination is like the antenna. It's what supposedly tunes into these thought vibrations broadcast by other minds.
So it's the part of us that picks up on these external thoughts.
According to this model, yes. The author sees it as the bridge between our conscious mind and, other sources of mental stimuli. The chapter doesn't detail all those sources, but it mentions them.
So it's not just passive receiving, is it? There's more to it.
Right. The idea is that when our own mind is more active, when its vibration rate increases, we become better receivers, more attuned.
And what increases this vibration rate?
Emotions, both positive and negative ones. They apparently step up the frequency of the mind.
So feelings are like turning up the volume or boosting the signal on our mental radio makes us better at picking things up.
That's a good way to think about it. The author argues that only thoughts vibrating at a really high rate, like exceptionally high, can actually travel through this ether from one brain to another.
So everyday thoughts don't make the cut.
Apparently not. They lack the vibrational energy. It's the thoughts charged with strong emotion that have the power to be transmitted and received. Thought itself is seen as energy vibrating very fast.
Okay, and the chapter singles out one emotion in particular, sex. Why that one? Seems quite specific.
It's definitely emphasized, and it's a theme in the author's other work, too. The argument is that the emotion connected to sex creates the most intense and powerful rate of mental vibration.
More intense than fear or love or joy.
According to this author, yes. When the brain is stimulated by this specific emotion, it's supposedly vibrating at a much, much higher frequency than normal.
And this higher frequency makes the creative imagination more receptive.
That's the idea. This concept of sex transmutation is brought in the conscious redirection of that powerful energy. By doing that, the theory goes, you elevate your thought vibrations significantly.
Making your antenna super sensitive to ideas floating around.
Exactly. Hyper-receptive, you could say. But it's presented as a two-way thing. A brain vibrating fast also attracts similar thoughts from others, and importantly, it infuses your own thoughts with the feeling needed for your subconscious mind to grab onto them and act.
Okay, so broadcasting and receiving. Let's talk about the broadcasting side. The subconscious mind is called the sending station. How does that work?
Well, the process described is consciously mixing thought with feeling with emotion.
Yeah.
You impress this emotionally charged thought onto your subconscious.
And the subconscious then transmits it.
Yes, it acts as the broadcasting station sending those thought vibrations out. And meanwhile, the creative imagination is the receiver, picking up vibrations from the ether.
And the tool to get this broadcasting station working is autosuggestion.
Correct. Autosuggestion is presented as the technique you use to consciously load the message, the emotionally charged desire, into the subconscious for broadcasting. The chapter points back to an earlier discussion on using autosuggestion to turn desire into, say, money.
Okay, so let me see if I've got this. You start with a strong desire. You mix it with intense emotion. Use autosuggestion to plant it in your subconscious. The subconscious broadcasts it. And your creative imagination receives related vibes. Is that about right?
You've nailed the sequence presented. Subconscious mind, creative imagination, autosuggestion. Those are the three key principles for this mental broadcasting setup. And desire is the spark that gets it all going.
Right. Now, the chapter then kind of zooms out, doesn't it? It talks about intangible forces more broadly. Why the shift?
It seems the author wanted to place this idea of thought transmission within a larger context. They suggest that big societal shocks, like the Great Depression they refer to, actually push people to think more about unseen forces.
How so? Because the usual tangible stuff failed.
Possibly. The argument is we tend to rely too much on our physical senses, on what's solid and measurable. Crises make us question that and consider the invisible things that influence us.
So the Depression was a sort of forced awakening to the intangible.
That's the angle. The author talks about entering a marvelous age where we'll understand these forces better, maybe realizing our other self, our non-physical aspect, is more powerful than our physical one.
And there are examples given, right? Like ocean waves, gravity.
Exactly. Powerful, undeniable forces we can't control and don't fully grasp. Electricity is another big one mentioned. We use it constantly, but do we really understand what it is? The author suggests we don't.
That's a fair point. And the soil example is quite effective too.
Yes, the unseen intelligence or force within the soil that gives us food, clothing, resources. It's a daily reminder, really, of our dependence on things we can't see.
Which all leads back to the brain itself. The author calls it the greatest of all the intangibles thought.
A powerful statement, definitely. It emphasizes how little we actually understood, even then, about the physical brain's machinery and how it translates something as abstract as thought into physical reality, though science was starting to look into it.
And that statistic about brain cell connections is just staggering. One followed by 15 million zeros.
It's almost impossible to comprehend, isn't it?
Yeah.
Dr. C. Judson Herrick, who's cited, used astronomical distances to try and give a sense of scale. It's vast.
Truly mind-boggling. And billions of nerve cells all arranged in this complex order.
Yeah, estimates of 10 to 14 billion nerve cells in the cortex alone. The author uses this complexity to pose a question, really.
Which is?
Could such an incredibly intricate network exist only for physical bodily functions? Or might it also be designed for communication with, well, with other intangible forces?
It certainly makes you wonder, and this ties into the next section about actual research happening at the time.
Yes, the chapter brings in Dr. J.B. Rhine's work at Duke University on telepathy and clairvoyance. This wasn't just speculation. It was experimental research getting attention, even reported in the New York Times.
So real-world experiments testing extrasensory perception, or ESP?
Exactly. Rhine had people trying to identify cards they couldn't see, and a significant number of participants scored way above chance consistently.
Making telepathy seem plausible, at least to some scientists back then.
It seemed enormously probable, according to the Times editorial quoted. And Rhine's findings were intriguing.
What stood out?
Well, things like these abilities not seeming to use known senses. Distance didn't seem to matter. Physical radiation theories didn't fit.
Interesting. Anything else?
Yeah, the subject's physical state affected scores, narcotics lowered them, stimulants raised them, and conscious effort seemed important for success.
And there was a suggestion that telepathy and clairvoyance might be the same ability.
Right. Someone named Wright, mentioned in the editorial, proposed they might be two sides of the same coin, the same underlying faculty, because they often appeared together in the same people.
So reading minds and seeing hidden objects could be linked.
That was the speculation. Wright even wondered if things like prophetic dreams might tap into that same core ability.
The chapter is careful, though, isn't it? It says the listener doesn't have to buy into all this completely.
No, it presents it as impressive evidence to consider. It grounds the earlier, more abstract ideas in some contemporary scientific investigation, which is quite effective.
And the author then connects Rhine's findings to their own experiences.
Yes, hinting at methods they discovered for stimulating the mind, for this kind of extrasensory perception, which they say will be covered more in the next chapter on the sixth sense.
Leading to that description of working with two staff members, the close working alliance.
Uh-huh. They had this method, almost like a specific kind of brainstorming. They called it similar to the invisible counselor's method, described later.
How did it work?
Pretty simple, actually. They'd sit together, state the problem clearly, and just discuss it. Each person contributing thoughts.
And the outcome was unusual.
The author says the strange thing was accessing knowledge or ideas that seemed to come from beyond their combined individual experience or knowledge. like tapping into something else.
And this is presented as an application of the mastermind principle.
Explicitly, yes. A practical, maybe the simplest way to use the mastermind blending minds together with a specific aim.
And there's a direct nudge to the listener, to you, to try something similar, possibly to unlock that Carnegie formula.
Yes, a very practical suggestion. Try forming a similar small group focused on a goal. And if it doesn't click now, the advice is to come back to this idea after reading the final chapter. It's actionable advice.
Definitely. Then the chapter wraps up with that point about the depression being a blessing in disguise.
Yeah, it's a surprisingly optimistic take, framing it as a forced opportunity for a fresh start, for new kinds of growth. It connects back to that idea of looking beyond the tangible.
Okay, wow. So to quickly recap this deep dive then, we started with the brain as this potential broadcasting and receiving station for thoughts, using the ether more as a metaphor for connection.
Right, fueled by the vibration of thought, amplified by emotion, especially according to the author, the emotion of sex through transmutation.
And the key players are the creative imagination as the receiver, the subconscious mind as the sender, and autosuggestion as the way to deliberately operate it.
Then we broadened out to intangible forces generally, how maybe we overlook them, and the sheer mind-bending complexity of the brain suggesting functions beyond just the physical.
Which led to Dr. Rhine's ESP research at Duke, offering some potential tentative scientific backing for non-sensory perception.
And the author's own practical application through a mastermind group dynamic, which listeners are encouraged to try.
And ending on that note of finding opportunity, even in major crises like the Depression, we definitely covered a lot of ground there.
We certainly did. From radio analogies to brain science to ESP research and practical collaboration. It's a dense chapter with some pretty provocative ideas.
It really is. So I guess the final thought to leave you with is this. If our brains are this incredibly complex, potentially capable of tuning into subtle vibrations or intangible forces, what else might be influencing our thoughts, our creativity, our experiences that we're just, not even aware of yet? Something to mull over.
Definitely food for thought.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.